welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith, and yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 171. I'm pleased today to introduce you to my new friends, Cameron and Lyssah Fry. In the first half of this two-part episode, they share the story of their tiny and feisty daughter, Jubilee. Born at just 25 weeks, 6 days, and weighing only 18 ounces, who repeatedly astounded medical staff with her tenacity and fighting spirit. Her testimony throughout her 393 days in the NICU was, "Watch what God will do." And her earthly life, though short by some standards, continues to have a profound impact. We also discuss the emotional toll of pregnancy after loss. You'll even get to hear baby Eiley in the background as we chat. And the Frys will share a little bit about their experience at a While We're Waiting weekend this past summer. Lean in and be encouraged. Hi, Cameron and Lyssah. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks so much. We're excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I have been looking forward to having you. You guys attended a retreat where I was not present, so I didn't have the opportunity to meet you in person. So I have really been looking forward to having this conversation. And I'd like to start out by just letting you introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
So we're currently residents of White Bluff, Tennessee, about 35, 40 minutes / miles west of Nashville. And we've been there for about 6 years and really enjoy the western side. We often joke with family, west side's the best side. As far as the big picture, we're both from California. So our roots go back to West Coast, but for me, I've spent most of my life in Tennessee. So I tell people what you see is Tennessee, but I know where my roots come from. I'll let Lyssah explain her story here because she hasn't been in Tennessee quite that long, but
I've been out here, though, since 2010. So if anyone's listening from Tennessee in Nashville area, I did not come when everyone came during COVID. I've been here much longer, so don't be offended. But yeah, we live in White Bluff. We've lived around the Nashville area, Middle Tennessee, since we got married 10 years ago. We have 5 children, 4 with us, and it's crazy. Our oldest is 7. Yep. So we've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a would-be just turned 2-year-old,
yep.
And then our 6-week-old. So
wow.
we got a full house and homeschooling, and Cam works remotely for a company that works with nonprofits and taxes and fun stuff like that. So
we're a nonprofit accounting firm. Yeah.
Got our hands in all those little pots. So
wow. Oh, wow. Your house has got to be a fun and exciting place to be with all of those kids around.
It is definitely an adventure and loud.
Yeah. I'll put it this way. There was a zoo outing that our work did back in June, and we had prior commitments, but I'm like, I'm at the zoo all the time. So
that's right. You live in the zoo.
Yep.
Yeah. What a sweet season of life that is. You know, I know when you're in it, it seems like it's going to last forever and all the craziness, but it goes by quickly.
They shoot up like weeds, and they keep you humble along the way. So we do the traditional thing with parents where we mark the heights, and it kind of displays the passage of time. And it's surreal. So you try to live life in slow motion. I know that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but every day is a gift. And as we'll talk about in this podcast, Jubilee helped cement that into our well-being. So
yes, absolutely. So tell us about Jubilee. I would love to hear her story.
So Jubilee is our 4th child. She was our 2nd surprise baby because we planned to be done after number 3. And then lo and behold, that was not the case. And we, went into our pregnancy assuming it was just like any other pregnancy. I'd always had kind of rough pregnancies, but like healthy babies, you know what I mean? Uncomplicated by those kind of standards. And so we went into our anatomy ultrasound thinking that this was just going to be, like it had always been. And we went in and found that she was severely IUGR, which is meant that she had intrauterine growth restriction. At 23 weeks, she was barely measuring 12 ounces. Normally, she would have been measuring at least a pound or a pound 0.2 or so. We found out that I had hardly any amniotic fluid. What should have been at least a 10 ended up actually only being a 5 or a 6. And so pretty much right there, my doctor was giving me steroid shots, which I didn't know at the time. That meant they figured she'd be coming in about 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
We left and kind of had this moment of, okay, what are we going to do? We don't know. Just going to have to walk this by faith. The next week, I went and saw the maternal fetal specialist, Cam and I did. And our goal was, let's try and make it to 32 weeks. We can do this. And of course, I'm like a challenge accepted. Let's do it. I was drinking for my amniotic fluid. They said that was the only thing I could do to help the amniotic fluid was just to keep drinking water, like up my water intake. So I was drinking over 200 ounces a day.
Wow.
Just trying. And that was keeping the level steady. So I wasn't losing anymore. And then that was, so Tuesday of my 24th week, we saw the maternal fetal specialist. We were going to be being monitored weekly. And then Friday, I woke up with a horrendous headache, checked my blood pressure. It was extremely, extremely high, and called my doctor. They said, okay, rest for an hour, take it again. I rested for an hour, took it again. It had gone up even higher. And they sent me to triage, got in, found out I had protein in my urine. So preeclampsia rearing its ugly head. And they checked me in. And I was hoping it would be like, okay, I'm checked in maybe for the weekend for observation, and they'll give me medicine and send me home. And I remember I had a nurse that night look at me and go, oh, honey, you're here till baby comes.
Oh, wow.
And so that started the whole, okay, well, we're trying to make it to 32 weeks. And at this point I was 24 and 6. And the doctor was like, let's just try and make it to 26 weeks. And then we'll go from there. And I made it to 25 and 6. And ended up, they were doing the normal monitoring, checking baby's heart rate, all that kind of stuff. And she was having some major D cells. And so they looked at me. This was like the first morning that Cameron didn't come in to visit me because he had a men's breakfast at church. And they're like, call your husband. He's got an hour to get here. Just as long as it takes for us to run a mag drip, we're taking baby. And it's like, oh, okay. And yeah, it was just it was the craziest, most whirlwind kind of season of our life, because it literally went from, you go in thinking everything's okay to like every time something changed, it was like, oh no. Like you think it's okay. And then it's like, nope, really not okay. And we joke because the Lord had put the name Jubilee on our hearts before we even knew it was a girl. Someone busted out the old school song, Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble? Is that the one? Or where it basically talks about open up the doors, let the music play, let the streets resound in singing. There's a point that says, it talks about Jubilee and that just one random offshoot. And there was something when we heard that song that just like resonated, and we knew it was going to be her name. But then we also heard the word surrender. And so we ended up naming her, before we knew anything was wrong, Jubilee Naleen, which means celebration of surrender. And we had to laugh, though, because we had done a lot of study in the weeks leading up to when all this started happening about the year of Jubilee and how it was a year of forced rest. It was a year of having to fully trust and rely on God. It was a year where captives were set free and debts were forgiven. And like, it just, everything was kind of brought back to this place of equilibrium and like where it needed to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we had no idea, from literally randomly having to go inpatient, that we were starting our year of Jubilee. And that was a year of forced rest and a year of slowing down and a year of depending on God for everything. And so we went into we went in for the C-section. It was considered emergent, not an emergency, obviously, 'cause, I was awake for it. And she came out, I think her scores were like 0, 0, 1 or something at 3 minutes. And then at like 5, they were up to like 1, 2, and 4 or something like that. So we got to see her very briefly. They held up a blanket right by my face and said, "Here she is. Okay, bye. Get a picture." And we got a picture, and, we had no idea how small she was or how, like, what everything meant, When we got up to see her for the first time that evening, it was like around 10 p.m. or something. She was under the bilirubin lights. She was in a little isolette. And we found out that she was 1 pound, 2 ounces, or 515 grams, and 10 inches long. And we always will tell people to put in perspective, if you picture an elf on the shelf, that is smaller than an elf on the shelf.
Wow.
Lengthwise, weight-wise, all that.
Yeah. That really does put it in perspective, because I was thinking to myself, trying to imagine, okay, 10 inches, wow, the size of an elf on the shelf. Wow.
And as we're coming up into the fall season and Halloween candy's out, a lot of candy bags, if you look at them, are just at a pound or a little over a pound. And so if you wanted to wonder how much a micro premium weighs, just pick up one of those bags of candy.
Wow.
And it's mind blowing,
Yeah.
So that started us, like I said, on this crazy ride, 393 days in the NICU. And she was literally, I think the first thing they told us when we got down there is she is feisty.
Yep.
She was not, even though she was super sick, she was not just laying there trying to let the vent work for her. She was trying to do it on her own. Someone came near her. She was kicking and batting, and like she was going to take on the world. We didn't know at the time, but pretty much no one thought she was going to make it through the first night. And then no one thought she was going to make it through the first few days. And then no one thought she was going to make it through the first week. And then on day 8, we did have a pretty intense crash where they, said you might want to come in. She made it through that. And she started her little testimony of like, watch what God will do. And that was really, I think, the phrase that really summed up. It was a banner. Watch what God will do. The whole time. In fact, we even had that written on a sign at one point in November. So she was 3 months old, not even to her due date. Her due date was November 28th. So we hadn't even gotten to her due date yet. And she had a lung collapse, and she had a really bad code event where basically for the first time we saw every neonatologist on the floor run in, all the RTs. Like, she was in a little pod that was maybe like a 7 by 8 square, and there was probably 20 people inside, trying to get her stable again. And one point, the neonatologist on shift said, "Mom, why don't you come sit by her? We know she likes that when you sit by her," which was doctor speak for, we got nothing left. Come be by her, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so we sat by her bedside all night, and her sats were, her O2 saturations were hanging in the 40s.
Very low.
Super low. And then somewhere around maybe 2 a.m., I watched she'd go between 45 and 46, 45, 46, 47, 46, 47, 46. And we literally watched her climb from the 40s and the 50s, 1% of oxygen at a time, back up into the 80s and 90s.
That's amazing.
People came and the next morning who had been on shift, they kind of looked around, what am I going to see when I look around the corner? And they saw her, and they saw her sats climbing up, and they were like, literally, the doctor's face when he walked back in was like, oh, okay. Well,
Wow.
Let's see what we can do, and it was one of those things where that sign we had that said, watch what God will do. At one point they were like, after this point, they were like, even if she gets past this and recovers, she's always going to be sick. I don't know that she'll ever be stable enough to go home. Like, there was a lot of naysaying starting to come out. And so we took that sign and we put it right on her vent. So anyone who looked at her vent had to be reminded, like, God was doing something and she was going to blow all of our minds. And that's what she did every time medicine said she wasn't going to come back, every time the pulmonary hypertension that she was diagnosed with flared up, God always brought her back around and used it as a way to really give this little baby who couldn't even speak, couldn't even cry because she was intubated, gave her the opportunity to show people this love and this desire to work miracles. And we had people who were like, I don't pray anymore, but I'm praying for her. And people who were on different sides of the political realm, who would fight, who would be connecting with us and being hey, we're all praying. And we just watched her tear down walls. It was the craziest thing. Here's this little baby who's just living her life in an isolate, and God was using her. And to the point, if we fast forward, when we had our most recent daughter, we actually had her. So Juju was in 2 different NICUs during her life. And there's a third big hospital in town that also has a large NICU. And so we delivered our most recent daughter, Eiley, at that other hospital, kind of getting ourselves, away from the trauma places. And it was funny because she did have to go to the NICU for about 36 hours after she was born. And when we were down there, the nurse who was down there looked at us and she's like, "You're Jubilee's parents?"
We didn't know she was.
And we're like, yeah. And she's like, "I followed her story. I had a 25-weeker and I followed her story." And it's so here we are at a completely different hospital. And we ran into 2 or 3 people who knew who our daughter was, and she'd never even been in that hospital.
Wow.
And so it was just mind blowing to see how God used her little life to bring hope to other people and to bring encouragement and to, again, tear down. It didn't matter what side of whatever you were on or what you believed about whatever, everyone was on Team Juju. And it was just such a beautiful thing to be part of. And she had the most feisty personality. She was so much fun. She side-eyed people all the time. She loved to do things that people did not expect her to do. So normally a micro preemie is on very restricted stimulation. And for her though, she would drop her sats when people walked away and it got quiet.
She wanted people.
As soon as we walked back, wow. She'd be upsetting 100%. And doctors would come in and be like, "Shh, let's not talk here." And we're like, "No, please have your meetings here." She loves it. They would try and do what they thought would work. And then someone would be like, "Well, I mean, we could do this, but it doesn't make sense that would work." And then they'd do it and it would work. And, she extubated herself at less than 6 weeks old, scaring the RTs, because she shouldn't have been strong enough to do that, Right. And she just constantly surprised people, constantly. She would look at you. She had the oldest, she was an old soul. When you looked in her eyes, it wasn't like you were seeing a newborn. She didn't look at things like, "Oh, what's going on?" It's she looked at things like she was trying to say things. And she was just the coolest kid. Sorry, I could talk obviously for.
There were times where I would hold her and it's just I feel like God was looking at me through her eyes. Yeah.
Wow. I'm just so enthralled listening to her story, and I'm just imagining her, what she must have been like, and what a gift she was to you, and then also to all those nurses and doctors that cared for her, and the respiratory therapists and all the different people who were coming in and out. What a gift she was. It's just amazing. Yeah.
We, at the hospital where she ended up, she spent most of her time at Vanderbilt. A bunch of them wore her picture on their name badges or her footprint. And it was funny because I'd see people and I'm like, "I don't even know who this person is." They've never been her nurse. People from other wards would come over and get updates and would stop by. And she had people signing up to be her primary, and we had the best primary team and the best neonatologist team. And even people who were how some people are kind of just crusty people, they don't get along with a lot of people. Even they liked her. They would stop by and be like, our primary nurse for her first birthday that we got to celebrate that with her before she passed.
Yeah.
And she's actually doing great during that time. There was this one guy who I think he was a X-ray tech, and he was always cranky. He was known for being the cranky guy. And even he like wrote her a note and put it in her book, and like that her primary nurse was making for her. It was just like he would stop by and be like, how's my baby? Like what, like, and just it, yeah, it was just, she really just was like, to know her was to love her. And
She pointed people to Jesus every day.
she really did. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I'm just amazed by her story and how such a tiny, tiny little girl could have such a huge impact on so many people. It's amazing. During this year that she was in the NICU, what were your conversations with God like during this time?
I would say for me, it was, Lord, you have a plan in all this. You have a purpose. But right now, in this moment, I don't see it. And early on during her life, it was a gradual, slow motion surrender of, you know what? I'm not supposed to know why. I'm just supposed to lean in and press in and just, like Lyssah said, watch and see what I will do. So a lot of those conversations were centered on the theme of learning to cope at the end of our rope. And just like Juby's name suggests, the implication of forced rest. It was really prophetic into the posture we needed to take. There was a lot of other things going on. While Jubilee was starting out her life, we had moved to Lyssah's parents for a couple weeks, and I'll loop this around just a second, but we were displaced from our home as Lyssah recovered. We finally moved back into our home when Jubilee was about 2 months, and we had a freak flood due to a malfunctioning washer. So we had to get new floors throughout the house. We moved back to her parents, and it was about a 6-month journey or 6-month adventure there, where we didn't even have our own home. And during that time, the NICU sort of became an extension of home. So a lot of those conversations were, okay, everything seems to be falling apart. What are you trying to teach us? We had a car accident during that time. It just seemed like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And yet the one constant throughout the whole voyage was this vibrant baby who was a feisty fighter, who clearly God's power was being made known in and through her struggle. Just like, Lord, how do you want to use this as part of this story? Because clearly it was a gift that we could tell in the moment, but we knew that, okay, something profound is happening in front of us. Someone who wasn't supposed to live past day one, who kept confounding people. I think our conversations were, why is this happening? And we could be like, okay, we're going to give ourselves some peace in punting the why.
Yes.
We're going to punt the why out, and we're going to be like, how do we co-mission with you as we almost pre-grief, as we struggle to make sense of that? So I would say, yeah, to answer your question, God was teaching us early on, if you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, just let me be your rock. As I say I am. Let me be your rock if you feel like you're a rock in a hard place, and it's okay. Like, I'm almost intentionally putting you here so that any place of dependence outside of me is gone. Mm-hmm. I'm ridding you of any place of codependency as this is happening, so that you could truly enter into the perseverance that I need you to demonstrate to the world around you. And that came into light November 10th. I remember the date when both Juby's lungs collapsed. Probably if I had to capture a single moment of her entire 393-day life, it stands out that if I was like trying to capture all of it in one moment, it's like Lyssah laying hands on one side. What do you call it? Her bed isolate. Yeah. You were laying hands on one side, I was laying hands on the other. It's just like, we don't feel peace at all. Like, the buck doesn't stop here. This is not how the story ends. So we prayed with expectancy. We prayed with confidence. We prayed with courage, and it just came out. So we just became conduits.
I think for me, a lot of the conversations were just, I asked why a lot, because I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But even then, I feel like the two things I can remember saying over and over were, I trust you. And realizing I was praying that in faith, even as I was praying it as it was true. I trust you. And then I always had in my head the picture of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they look at the king and they say, "Our God can save us, but even if He doesn't." And I feel like learning to pray, I know you can, and even if you don't, I trust you, and get to a place where I meant it. It stunk, having to walk that out on September 20th or September 18th and go, all right, we didn't, you didn't do what we thought you were going to do, but we still trust you. There's still something here that you're doing, even if we don't see what that is. I think we got to a point where we were like, man, she made it this far. She's totally coming home, especially because we lost her after she had been doing the best she'd ever been doing. We lost her suddenly. We were talking about coming home. We had completed our classes. We had started her medicine weans, and that was going to be the big thing, that medicine weans and getting in-home care was going to be our two big obstacles for her coming home. And so when we lost her at that point, where everyone I think had finally gotten to the point where they were like, okay, we can hope. Yeah, this is happening, And then to turn around and lose her, it was really like, I can remember even that day being like, hearing the Holy Spirit, like, do you still trust me? Will you still trust me? And I can remember sitting there holding her, knowing that she was passing and being like, I don't know. But I really feel like for me, that's where I trust you. And even if you don't do what I think you're going to do or what I want you to do, and really asking for strength to be able to walk through that if that was the case, because I can promise you there was no way that was anything that either of us could have done in our own strength. That was something that the Lord had been laying groundwork for many times over. So
yes,
I'll add one more thing to that, and then
yes.
sorry, I'll let you share your next question. Just because I think it's important to say, because when I'm thinking about other parents who have gone through a similar journey, a lot of my conversations those first few weeks and months probably were similar to what Jacob must have been saying when he wrestled with God in Genesis. I believe it was 32. That's essentially what we were doing. We were wrestling to terms. We weren't just coming to terms with what was happening. We were wrestling to terms. And there was times where I felt like my faith was never stronger. And then the next day, you could feel like I'm the weakest, most pathetic, like, God is, I don't want to say, Job's wife, curse me and die.
Right.
But there were some times where it's like, what did we do, God, to offend you? And so it was just embedded in part of the wrestling process. But we had to, like, Lyssah and I had to have these conversations regularly in order to keep our sanity intact. It's like, there's purpose in this. And that purpose is going to be the story of restoration, reconciliation to the world. We just don't know exactly how that's going to look. It's just all the more reason to kind of almost sit back and just let God go before us.
Yes. This is so interesting to me because a lot of ways our stories parallel each other. Our daughter was 16 when she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and we walked that road with her for a year. Again, doing all of the treatments, all of the things that we needed to do, the radiation, the chemotherapy. We had hope all the way up until the end that we might, that she might be the one person who survives glioblastoma. But we wrestled with all those exact same things. Our conversations with God are so similar to what you guys went through. And, I just didn't realize as we started this conversation how similar our journeys really were. Jubilee was much younger than Hannah, but actually Hannah's personality sounds a lot like Jubilee's. She was an old soul as well. And she was one of those that, all of the doctors and nurses just really built a special relationship with her because of the attitude that she had as she fought her battle. And so it's just really fascinating to me how similar our stories are. The age is different, but you know what? That doesn't matter. We wrestle with the same kinds of issues and the same struggles. And, God has used our girls, both of our girls, in mighty ways. And so thank you for sharing Jubilee's story with us. I was going to ask you, and you've already answered that question, whether Jubilee was a name you had already chosen, because it's so perfect for her. And I love that her name, with the middle name, Jubilee Nylene, is celebration of surrender. And that's the point that you had to reach with the Lord, isn't it? You had to reach the point of surrendering so you could move forward.
Yeah. And what's funny is like you think you've gotten there, and then nope, there's more. And like I think that's one way that she'll always be an active part of our lives is even now, we're coming up on a year, our first year. We just celebrated our first birthday without her on the 21st of August. And the September 18th will be her first, the anniversary of her first heavenly birthday. Yeah. And I still feel like every day is still choosing to surrender and choosing, am I going to celebrate the surrender, or am I going to resist it or resent it? Or, is it something that I'm looking at as I'm defeated, so I surrender, or I'm dependent, so I surrender. Mm. And there are some days when it's totally the defeated one. I've just got nothing left, and it's just like, fine, you've got it, yes. But really trying to stay in that place of being dependent and surrendering. And I'm grateful for her for teaching us that and continuing to teach us that, and for the Lord for using her in that capacity,
Yeah. It's amazing what we can learn from our daughters, or what we can learn from our children.
It is.
Yeah. You would never imagine that's the case, but when you have one like Jubilee, you can learn so much from her. Now, you've just recently had another baby. You've referenced that earlier, and we can hear her a little bit in the background, which is just so sweet. I love it. Tell us.
Noisy sleeper.
Yes. Well, tell us a little bit about Eiley.
So Eiley was our third surprise, because we were really done after Jubilee. And I guess that's the one thing. Tell God you're done, and he'll be like, no.
Right.
My banner was still in play last year, even after she passed.
Yeah. So Jubilee passed in September, and we found out in November that we were expecting, which, if you've been pregnant after losing a baby, whether it's miscarriage, stillbirth, child loss, whatever the case is, it's terrifying. And so again, it was like almost like Juju part 2, yes. Only it was a lot more of kind of one thing we say about child loss is like, you can't unknow things. Once you've walked through that. Same thing with NICU or medically complex kid. Like once you know things, you can't unknow them. And so it becomes an even bigger like battlefield in your mind, where the enemy likes to try and put a lot of fear. And I'd be lying if I said that I overcame that well most of the time, because I was a wreck.
I can imagine. That's got to be terrifying.
It was. But we really felt early on like the Holy Spirit spoke to our hearts that she was going to be a restoration of what was stolen. Because one of the things I think that we grieved a lot about Juju, because she was our last, can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes, our last,
right.
Was that, we didn't get to hold her until she was 23 days old. And then anytime we held her early on was with the help of a nurse and an RT, and having her placed on us and not really being able to touch her. It wasn't until the very end that we were able to even just pick her up out of her bed once she had her trach and we were trained and they were confident we could do it and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So to live with your last child in this place of medical complexity, attached to wires and, life support and all that kind of stuff, there was a lot that felt like it had been stolen from us. And so early on, we felt like the Lord told us that this pregnancy was going to be a restoration. And it was the easiest pregnancy I've ever had, aside from like the emotional and mental stuff. We felt early on that we wanted to name her something referencing light, which I've seen, I feel like a lot of other parents who have babies after loss, there's a lot of like Lucy's and Luca's and a lot of like referencing light. Because when you've lost a child, it's the darkest place you've ever been. And so Eiley means bright, shining light. And then her middle name is Nisi, Nisi Love, and Nisi, obviously after Jehovah Nisi, which is his banner of victory and love. And we just felt like God was making a declaration of his victory and love through her. So yeah, it was really this place of having to confront everything over again. She was a repeat C-section. She ended up going down to the NICU for about 36 hours. And so it was really funny to go to have been in the NICU for a baby who was literally
it was like a fear checkup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to go in there and be like, oh, she just needs a little bit of high flow oxygen while her lungs dry out. It's
right. Wow.
You're like, okay, all right, but it was just, we joke that we had one baby that didn't get to graduate the NICU because she was in there for so long. And then we had another baby who didn't get to graduate the NICU because she was only in there for less than a day. So it was just funny to have those two spectrums of
yes,
to have the sickest baby in the NICU and to have the healthiest. She was able to come back up to our room in the hospital. You know what I mean? So it was just it just was really, it's been really cool to see the Lord say, okay, this is restoration. She's by far been our best sleeper.
Smoothest pregnancy,
best sleeper. And it's been really healing for our kids, I think, because when we told them we were pregnant with her, we actually wrote them a letter from Juju and basically said, don't worry about me. I'm okay here in heaven. I love hanging out with Jesus. It's the best. But I know you really wanted a baby. So I talked with Jesus and he's sending you one.
Yep.
And our 7-year-old still references that letter that he got from Juju. But it's really how it felt. If I could totally see Juju being up there and being like, I'm good with being here, y'all. But my siblings waited a year for me to come home and they didn't get me. They got to meet her twice. And so they have been the most doting siblings on Eiley. And she's kind of been you can tell she's been a really healing place for them because it's allowed them to talk about things because when I was pregnant, they would ask, is Eiley going to have to stay at the hospital? Is Eiley going to die? Is Eiley they would ask the questions. And I feel like it gave them a little bit of direction to process through some of that, you know what I mean? And now they're very happy and love her almost too much. We're trying to protect her a little bit from all the love.
Right.
I would say to kind of piggyback off that, to me, her homecoming date was probably more exciting than the day that she was born.
That's true.
Oh, I'm sure.
Just being straight up, because we know what it's like to give birth to life in a high risk setting. But I remember I didn't get emotional the day that Eiley was born. I got emotional when I took her home, and I thought about my kids and what it'd be like. It was like the punctuation of that ministry of reconciliation, that redemptive narrative that at the beginning of Eiley's life was the only thing we were holding on to. It's like, this does not make sense. God, this is #too soon. We're not ready for this. Maybe we would have gotten there, but we just had this idea closing out 2022, heading into this year. We need to get through our grief first and kind of almost get it out of our system a little bit before we move on. And God's like, no, I'm going to, through this new life, through Eiley, you're going to show people how you can process through mourning and grieving simultaneously, expecting with hope.
Yeah.
Those two things could be concurrent, expecting with hope and mourning and grieving at the same time. They're not two separate things that have to happen one before the other. They're two parallel streams. And she taught me that. She taught us that early this year.
No, sorry, you said that, and that just reminded me of actually when we were at the While You Were Waiting retreat, the last night we were walking out to the s'mores bar or whatever. I was standing and I was talking to some of the ladies because we just finished the men's and women's kind of breakout thing. And we started talking, and it was funny because we're all sitting there. We've barely known each other for over 24 hours, but these people feel like family. And it's there's just this deep connection already that you're just and I remember sitting there because we've walked through some stuff after losing Jubilee, people not know, just there's a whole lot of levels of grief. And to be able to come to a space where there wasn't any need for explanation. It was just, you're received, you're loved, you connect with people. Everyone's story is different, but everyone is you understand the same thing. And it's we were talking, and I remember having this thought of, this is the gift of grief, in that you understand a community that you never would necessarily ask to be part of, right? But it is the truest form of community that I've ever experienced in my life, that is literally lets you be as you are, mess and all. No one in a grief community expects you to be good or perfect or whatever. They receive you in your mess, in your craziness, in your emotions. Like it is literally come as you are and be received. And I remember thinking, why do we struggle with this so much as like the body of Christ? And I was like sitting there thinking like how can we find a way to apply that gift of grief that allows for such seamless community and love into that wider body who hasn't necessarily where in our faith is that same seed. And what you just said there, it's that duality of grief and hope, and of I grieve my sin, I grieve this broken world, and I hope for something that's still on its way. And so I was just putting that together.
Yeah, no, that was one of my takeaways of the retreat weekend in Moscow. I was like, this is a preview of where we're headed. This is like God's intent of the church, among other things. So I felt the very same thing you were describing. It was God's original design and intent for community from the beginning of time. And we just tapped into that and bonded, obviously, through like-minded people and experiences, and that the rawness that I think that While We're Waiting does such a good job of preserving through the people it serves. It's like, this is a safe place to be raw and transparent and honest with people. And when you start adding layers of honesty, God's love shines brighter through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you just described exactly what we experience at every one of these retreats that we have the opportunity to facilitate. People come in with all different kinds of loss, and it doesn't matter. The bonds that we form they form rapidly, and they are strong, and they are long lasting. And I think that's, like you said, that's the way the body of Christ should be all the time. Mm-hmm. And we are able to see it just kind of in microcosm at every one of these retreats. And it's just such a gift. So I'm glad you guys were able to attend. This concludes the first half of my conversation with Cameron and Lyssah Fry. I hope you'll come back next week as we extend our discussion to cover a wide range of issues faced by bereaved parents, including a chat about the marriage relationship, the before and after of child loss, the beauty of the gospel, and following Jesus in a time of deep pain and sorrow. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I am Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith, and yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 172, which is a continuation of my conversation with Cameron and Lyssah Fry. If you missed last week's episode, you'll want to go back and listen to hear the story of their tiny and feisty daughter, Jubilee, born at 25 weeks, 6 days, and weighing just 18 ounces, who repeatedly astounded medical staff with her tenacity and fighting spirit. Her testimony throughout her 393 days in the NICU was, "Watch what God will do," and her earthly life, though short by some standards, continues to have a profound impact. Today, we discuss the marriage relationship after loss, the before and after of child loss, the beauty of the gospel, and following Jesus through pain and sorrow. We'll pick up our conversation right where we left off last week. I wanted to ask a question. How have the two of you kind of managed your grief together as husband and wife? A lot of times there's differences in the way we grieve as spouses. How have you all dealt with that?
I would say that we've handled that there's similarities and there's differences.
Mm-hmm.
We both are communicators. We're internal processors. I think you almost have to look at Juju's life in two separate halves. I think that for me, I was a bit more quiet in the beginning, more subdued, and I'm just kind of taking the punches as they came, or so I felt.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you could correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that you were doing that in your own way. Thankfully, there were times we were strategic at sometimes I felt like it was random where we were able to be honest with how we were feeling. But I think most days, though, if I had to like number them out, I think we were just still together. We were just silent. We learned to be okay with the silence, and sometimes just learning to communicate without the words and just simply being there in God's ministry of availability, using words if necessary. I think that we looked at simply being with Juju in the NICU as our date night, even just like this is a chance. Like we joked about that. It's like we don't have date nights anymore. Our date nights are like we go to the NICU and I know
so your Taco Bell in the lobby and then back up to.
But meaningful conversation. Like we knew, like okay, some of the most meaningful moments are happening. Like we don't have to effort in trying to make this a special connection. God is here. I'm a writer, as you probably have noted, and so I probably wrote once or twice a month to kind of get some of my emotions out. And I do think this is a good exercise for people to just set time aside and let yourself vent out into the void and invite God into that mist, of course, but just vent into the void and see what comes out. And you'll be surprised. So there's a book in the work with Jubilee that I'm putting together, and half of that's going to be things that I wrote during her time. And so I think it's wise to have an outlet.
Mm-hmm.
That's just between you and God. But there's also, of course, the other side of we need to be there for each other. And it was hard. Again, that first half was hard because we didn't have our safe place of home to go to. We had to let that be our car. We had to let that be over the phone when we were ships passing in the night, and just especially the NICU. It's one of the reasons why NICU became that extension of home. And in the second half, I think it was more like, okay, you got used to a rhythm. So you start to feel a little bit more empowered. And as, kind of Juju went, you went, and we went too. Kind of now you're secure in this buckle up. We already know it's bumpy. We just kept the conversation going. But I think for me, the biggest aha moment through our relationship and how we communicated with each other is just learning to be okay in the stillness.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we were given what I view as a gift in that we knew for a long time that we might lose her. It wasn't one of those, like my heart goes out to any parent who just wakes up one morning or gets a call. And don't get me wrong, we did get that call. You know what I mean? She'd coded twice already, and they were trying to actively resuscitate her when they called me in, but we were able to get there. She stabilized enough that we had time with her. Like, you know what I mean? So, but because we'd had those calls a few times, and because we'd lived on this edge of a knife essentially for a year, I think we learned to communicate what needed to be communicated, because we were never guaranteed tomorrow, and we were always aware of that with her. We both also had our roles that we stepped into in that. And because of that, I think that allowed us during our grieving period to almost have that kind of same, like, it's like we don't have, like, he can see if I'm having a hard day and he somehow rallies. And the same thing, if he's having a hard day, he doesn't have to say it. I see it. And without even trying, it triggers that like response of, okay, nope, I have to rally. And I've been really grateful that we've never had like a bad day on the same day.
It's crazy how that works.
Yeah, that is a common experience that I hear all the time. And that was true for Brad and I as well, that we hardly ever both had a terrible day at the same time. One of us was up when the other one was down, and vice versa. And that's a common experience. And I really think that's a gift from God.
It really is. And I think it gives us the opportunity because we had that space of learning to say what we needed to say. He can look at me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I just really missed Gigi today." And he knows, and he's like, "I miss her too." And that's part of it. I think there's been this almost like a call and response, even if what we're feeling is at different times, it's validated in the other person, even if they're not actively like where you are in that moment. I think that's been a big thing. It's like, I've never felt like he was judging me because I was having a hard day. And I hope you've never felt like I was judging you if you were having a hard day. And we've had moments of like angry outbursts, or we've had things happen, but we've been quick to look at each other and be like, "I'm really sorry. Like I'm very emotional today, and that's not an excuse," and being able to receive that from one another as well. I think this whole thing has really just taught us a lot of grace. And I think that's allowed us to grieve by extending that grace to each other, to our kids. You know what I mean? It's just, I think, giving each other space and recognizing we're similar, but we're very different people. Cam is a thinker and a processor. Like, let me have some time. I am let me talk it out. I'm a very in the moment person. And so for me, like when I feel things, like I have to feel them now. For him, he's able to be like, "I will come back to you and I will feel you in a minute," and
yes, that's so true.
And so I think because of that, it's allowed us to give each other space for that. Like, I've learned, okay, if I'm in a moment and he's not in a place for a moment, I'm going to go have my moment, and then we can circle back, and trying not to take, I really think giving each other, again, grace, and trying not to take things overly personal. And I'm just grateful because we've met other people who didn't have that same kind of connection. And I really feel like, I think it boils down to expectations, maybe. Yeah. And we expect grief to look like it does for us. But because we'd already walked through this year of kind of like living grief, and we'd already kind of realized we process different, I think that allowed us to walk into grief and keep those same roles, keep that same support and rhythm, maybe.
Yeah, I felt like we were really walking through some hell there for a bit. It's just like, are we going to loosen our grasp, or we're going to hold on tighter? It's just like, goes back to that learning to cope at the end of your rope metaphor. It's like, tie a knot, hold on and be still. So it almost like there's an effortlessness into the togetherness, so to speak. And there were times where you could sense the difference in depths. I'm sure you and Brad felt that too. It's like you were at a lower depth. I think probably more often than not, Liz, you were at a lower depth. And I felt like I was looking down, almost like I can't reach you. And like, God's like, it's okay. You can't just be there. Like, just talk. Let me be the one to save. Okay. Let me be the one to minister to her depth. And so, it's like being okay at being at different depths was another side effect through the journey. It's like, it's okay that I might be a bit more at the 20,000 foot level and Lyssah's doing the recon at the surface. I think it actually worked out well in terms of ministering life to our kids through Juju's life.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, like you guys, we had that year to kind of pre-grieve. Mm-hmm. And I do think that made a difference too with us, because we got to kind of figure out some of those things before Hannah went to heaven. And we're able to carry that over with our relationship, because like you guys, we're very different in the way we process things. Brad is more the verbal processor and I'm the more internal processor, but we were able to give each other grace with that. And because of that, we didn't really ever struggle in our relationship. Although, certainly there were times that we had to talk things out, and but God gave us the grace to do that. And like you said, I think He equipped us gradually for that point because of the journey that we walked leading up to her homegoing. So I believe that all of us that have lost a child have this very sharp dividing line in our lives. There's the before and the after. So talk about the before Cameron and Lyssah and the after Cameron and Lyssah. How have you changed?
I would say, for starters, as cliche as it sounds, really receiving each day as a gift. We're less prone to take things for granted. I'll say it that way. Juju's story as a testimony is an asset in their life. So, and I tell people, her story, it's like the ultimate thumbnail, any perseverance or endurance I show in this life. So I feel like there's a bit more of a, I got this mojo in my spiritual bloodstream, if that makes sense. There's not as much that God in me, near me, with me, etc. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There is that. On the flip side, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but on the downside of things, I just feel like the get up to feelings of happiness or just even receiving joy of the Lord as your strength. I just feel like momentous occasions, things that normally would have brought you more excitement, everything just feels a bit more dull or capped. And we felt that certainly each holiday that's happened since, just like this used to feel like the traditions of the family, like we look forward to this, and now it's not as much of a look ahead. So it's one of those, it's an odd dichotomy really, where it's like you feel stronger internally, you feel, okay, I don't have to take as many steps to making the courageous and bold decision. At the same time, what I'd give to just feel that extra pep in my step. And you wonder, will it ever come back? I don't know, but I just think, again, it's how I steer out of that is, okay, where can I find the gratitude and Thanksgiving? And my miss sometimes is as simple as declaring the attributes of God to get me into a good place. It's like, it's not about life's not about my satisfaction, contentment anyway. But I think it's just, okay, where are those codependencies? Let me take him captive. And, it really kind of compels you to walk upon the foundation of your faith and what you believe in. So,
and I think for me, I grew up having a huge, pretty unshakable faith. Like I went on mission trips. I was the kid who loved Jesus from an early age, did internships, dedicated my life, have followed when he said go, I was like, cool, I'm there, yeah. And that had gone into my adulthood, you know what I mean? So when I feel like for me, one of the biggest changes was a major testing, a major fire, because I'd always seen him come through, and having to come face to face with sometimes him coming through does not look like I thought it would look. And I've always been, I'm not sure if I would call it a optimistic pragmaticist or a pragmatic optimist. That's always, I'm pretty logical and anchored, but I've always been look on the bright side. It'll work out. It'll all work out, and I've definitely over the last year gone through a season of, it's been hard. I was always the person, if someone's sick, let me pray for him. I'm going to pray. And now it's been hard with my kids and Mom, I have a tummy ache. Will you pray for me? And it's yeah. And I want to jump into the whole, but you know what? Sometimes maybe it's not God's will to heal your tummy ache. I don't know. There's been so much that I realized how much Western theology had gotten into my beliefs that I didn't realize. And so in a way, again, I'm super grateful because I want to be in that place where I know, hey, whether he does or he doesn't, he's still sovereign. Mm-hmm. And just because he doesn't mean that I did something wrong. And it doesn't mean that it's not his, his will doesn't always look like we think it is. There's a bigger picture. And right. So I feel like I've gone through a lot of brokenness over this past year in the after Juju timeframe. I've gone through a lot of anger. I was always whatever God gives me, I'll receive it and I'll take it. And again, once those things are put to the test and you stand on the other end of your prayer,
yes,
you're like, oh, here we go. Okay, actually got to put feet to that. And so yeah, I've dealt with a lot more anger. I've always been a very pretty relaxed person, and dealt with a lot of anger this year. Anger at God, anger at situation, anger at myself, anger at family member and just being like family members and just, so I think I've had to confront, like, where Cam has seen a lot of the good rise to the top in him. I've seen a lot of the dross coming to the top for me to be skimmed off. And I'm grateful for it, because you can't unknow once you know. And it's shown me how many people out there are walking with burdens that I had no idea were a thing. And I feel like it's also birthed in me a true form of compassion, not just
Yes.
a compassion in theory, but a compassion in truth now. So
The sensitivity to
Yeah.
other people's needs certainly has gone up for both. Just, the Lord broadening the 10 pegs of our empathy and just getting outside of beyond ourselves. I mean, we saw a lot of hurting hearts, a lot of grieving hearts in the NICU, and it's actually one of the positive takeaways is like we got to see what hopelessness looks like to another degree, and like inspires you, like, I want to be part of God's hope story to other people. So there's that prick of the soul where it's like, man, I've been so selfish.
Yeah.
And I really want to not be the same. I feel like I'm just starting to get my groove into new levels of maturity, how it manifests in selflessness. Cause I mean, I was doing some things, but it was a very more compartmentalized life for me, pre-Juju. And I think that's just like, it's not just courage and boldness in general or more faith in general. It's wanting to minister to people who are going through their depths, and they don't scare me. Like we're not intimidated by those depths. Whereas, a lot of people are. There are people are afraid to come up to you and be like, hey, how you doing? Checking in on you. We've seen that this year, and the temptation for offense has been there for both of us. And we know we need those offenses, as the word says, but we want to, hey, we've been there. It's like, we've gone through some crazy crap. And even if God was using it for his glory. So yeah, that's kind of one of the challenges. It's like, we're not there yet, but we feel a peace internally that we're on our way to being able to minister to those depths. And it's one of the reasons why it's like, yeah, God had purpose to this for sure.
Yeah. And finding the beauty in brokenness.
Yeah.
And being okay with it.
The Japanese pottery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kintsugi.
Yes.
Kintsugi.
Yes. So much of what you're saying is the same thing that I experienced, especially going through the cancer journey with Hannah, and then the time following. What you said about, we have that Western theology. It's not really the prosperity gospel, but it's this Western theology that, everything is going to work out okay, and God's going to answer my prayers the way I am praying. And yeah, some of that needs to be stripped away, because like you said, the will of God doesn't always look like what we think it should. And the sovereignty of God is something that we have to come to terms with and realize that we are probably not going to understand, and have to be okay with that and live with that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of the gospel.
Yes.
The beauty of the gospel is God can redeem whatever the brokenness is.
Exactly.
And that redemption may not look like we want it to look, but in the end, he knows what it is that we need. I never would have wanted another kid. Never, ever. Because I wouldn't have wanted to walk through that again. But I'm so grateful that he saw fit to give that to us and gave us the strength to walk it out. And that's the thing that I think that's what we miss sometimes in our Western belief system, is that his burden is easy and his yoke is light, because it's not about the expectation. It's about, he knows us in our very most broken place. And he loves us in that very broken place. And he walks and he carries us. That's why it's easy. We're not carrying the burden. He's carrying us and the burden. And so I think that, sorry, I'll get rambly.
I love your rambling. It's great. Oh, yeah. Oh, what a great conversation. I know that you guys have an interest in bivocational ministry, from what I've been able to kind of pick up. Talk about what that is and why it's so important. I know this is a little bit of a shift in our conversation, but I was just curious how you guys got involved with that and what it is exactly that you do.
So His Goal Friday is the current name for this bivocational endeavor. Our tagline is building a bridge for the bivocational. it started with a dream we had almost 10 years ago, as crazy as it sounds. We were youth pastors at the time.
And working full-time jobs.
And we both were working full-time jobs. And we just had a coming together of the heart of wanting to build a resource for people who were pastoral leaders in ministry, but they had that tent-making job, that they had those day commitments, and it was work-life balance that we were trying to inspire hope to. It started out specifically for, as a resource for those who were in church leadership and had that extra job, but we kind of learned to kind of expand what it meant to be bivocational. And we're now trying to speak to a very wide audience where anyone can identify.
Where it's not a difference between your secular life and your sacred life. There's a coming together, and there is a mission field. You can pastor people just as much in your job as you can within the walls of the church. And you can, it's not about this is the more sacred calling because you have a fivefold ministry calling, but whatever you've been given by the Lord to do, whatever you've been given to set your hand to, that is your ministry. And we want to resource people with that. We want to encourage them in that, because it can be like, it used to be so frustrating. Like, we'd be the last to find out about stuff because we couldn't make staff meeting during the week because we were at our jobs. And then, we'd be like 2 or 3 weeks late on stuff by the time like an email came out. And then we're like, oh, okay. It can get really discouraging where you just feel very alone and isolated. And rather than it being this is a beautiful thing. You get to experience the best of both worlds. You get to, have the fellowship that comes from faith, and you get to have the ministry that comes from a mission field. And it's a beautiful thing to be in, even as it's stressful and a lot, And so I think that was kind of our heart, was to really just equip people, regardless of where they are, with the tools they need to embrace what God's given them and walk it out.
Yeah. So finding the balance between sacred and secular is a big one, but also helping marketplace ministers, as we like to call them, find their unique spiritual gift mix. I like to think of the sonic gift combination as a word picture for this. There's between 20 and 30 spiritual gifts in the New Testament that Paul talks about. And we each have a specific set in a specific order, and that's by design. And a lot of people don't know, number one, what those are. It's not just fivefold. It's also, we can get into giving, gifts, hospitality, and exhortation, all those, what some might think secondary gifts, but helping people translate them to the service of their jobs. For me, I'm a pastor, teacher, prophet, and I've worked in accounting and sales industries. I currently work for a nonprofit accounting firm. And people, it's not talked about enough. I don't feel like how to be a pastor in political environments, in the educational realm, in medical environments. We've compartmentalized it so much. So we just had this heart about 10 years ago to just start writing with arrows on our backside, and just we're going to break down these walls and help awaken people to how this looks within their vocational calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I love that. My husband worked as a school administrator for 31 years before he retired, and it was always his mission field. That was his job, but he always served and thought of it as his mission field, public school administration, and he served well. So bivocational, even there to me, because his desire was always to show the love of Jesus to every student, every teacher, everybody that he came into contact with in the school system. So if people want to learn more, I know you've got the His Girl Fryday Facebook page, right? And a website. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. His Girl Fryday with a Y, Fryday. So I don't think the other version is like the movie. It's not going to take you anywhere. But yeah, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, Spotify. We have our own podcast. It kind of the project had to be put on hold for a little bit for reasons that I understand. And right now, how we use that. I post a lot of my Jubilee reflections on that website. So helping marketplace. So I was like, how do you want to merge this together? I was like, well, we can empower the marketplace ministers in the world to deal with those in their midst who are going through this. using your story as an example. So there's still a vocational element in Juby's story that is tied, but yeah. So I love that Brad did that, because we work with students, and yeah, it's like I am not just a pastor over here; I'm a pastor here too. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to just kind of point people to your social media links and things like that. So I'll put links down in the show notes, because you do talk about your story and your grief and how God has used that in your life and in your ministry. So I want people to be able to find that. So I'll include all of those links in the show notes. So one more question I always like to ask before we close, and that is, has music been an important part of your journey? And if so, what is on your playlist?
Well, if people are on Spotify.
I was going to say, when Juby was, I mean, you have to answer that, like, talk about, pre-Juby, post-Juby, and then during. Like, obviously, there's the Jubilee Maverick City song that was became iconic very quickly. Maverick City, there's other songs, I think, by Maverick City that on our playlist too.
I would say since we've lost Juju, some of the songs that have really kind of ministered to my heart, I guess you could say, Same God by Elevation Worship, Anxious Heart by Jeremy Camp, Truth I'm Standing On by Leanna Crawford, My God Is Still the Same by Sanctus Real, Another in the Fire by Hillsong, Whatever You're Doing by Sanctus Real, Stars by Skillet, Even If, that's been a big one for me, by Mercy Me, The Battle Belongs by Phil Wickham, Broken Hallelujah by The Afters.
That's a good one.
Has been a huge one. Yeah, there's been so many. And then I would say in this newer season, I know I've just given like 1,000, but Joy is Coming by Todd Galbraith. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Firm Foundation by Maverick City. Praise featuring Brandon Lake has been a big one lately. Like, just really remembering that is who he is, and fear is not my future. Because again, it's really easy when you've walked through the dark to feel like the dark is still with you. So I feel like I went through a time where I needed to know everything was valid. And now I'm entering that season where I need to know that a little light can illuminate the path. So, but yeah, for me, music has been really big. I had a playlist that played all the time in Juju's room, and I still can't listen to most of those songs right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because we did have a Juju playlist.
Yeah.
And NICU playlist where those songs were. So I think that really contributed to what was happening in the supernatural.
So, but yeah, I think for every season there's been a few songs, but serious, Broken Hallelujah by The Afters. I think that was one of the first songs that really just like broke me, because it literally talks about all I have is a broken hallelujah. All I have, like, I have nothing left to give you, God. Nothing left.
I'll add one more to that extensive list. You just, it's not grief specific, but Good in Love by Travis Green and Stephanie Gratzinger. Just part of the, I think has Bethel roots there. So
yeah,
never shortage of good music out there. We have Play Love on in our cars, probably number one station.
Right. Yeah, we do too. All right. Well, you guys gave us a great list of a bunch of songs we can look up and add to our playlist. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Just one thing, sort of just a prophetic stirring, just because I felt it during the second half of Juju's life. And once I kind of captured it, and was able to put words to it, it really inspired me. So if there's any parent out there who is maybe going through this, where they have a sick child and perhaps they're in that pre-bereavement place, pre-grief place, I know we want to identify with the woman with the bleeding problem, and we feel like, we make our objective, I just got to touch Jesus. I got to get a piece of his robe. And I felt like I was that person, that character in the Bible during those last few months. And there was a tendency to be discouraged, because I'm like, man, I feel like I can't keep pace with Jesus. I don't understand. I'm trying to get to him. And sometimes I'd be like, Jesus, will you just slow down for us? Like, we're trying to get to you. And so there was that internal frustration. And I remember actually having a dream about like the climax of this whole thing came around the time that Juju passed away. And I finally got to Jesus. He turns around. It's like, you were never supposed to touch my robe. You weren't ever supposed to touch it. I know you thought that that was sort of the objective here. No, your call, your mission was to follow me. Well done. You did that. Look behind you and see how many more people are following me because of what you enlisted, because you're faithful to the call and you're obedient and you learned to press into me. It wasn't perfect, but I just want to encourage some people out there who feel like they're giving it their all. They're running after Jesus. They're following him in their weakness and they feel like they can't reach him. That's okay. I thought there was something wrong with me, the reason I couldn't get to him, but that you can just take that pressure and punt it away. It doesn't have to be a part of your belief system. It's just sometimes that's going to be what we're called to do. It's very simple. Just follow me. Drop what you're doing, come follow me, and watch what I will do. So I just wanted to share that. And also the other thing is, because Liz didn't really get a chance to describe it in full detail, but if there is an icon in Juju's life, it's the butterfly. We used to think that it was a kind of a cheesy thing, but it became a theme as part of like, we talked about her banner during her life, and we would put the butterfly in any room that she was in. And because we found out during the process somehow that actually means watch and see what God will do. There's a tie-in to that phrase with the image of a butterfly. So one of the things we did earlier this year was we planted a butterfly bush in front of our home, and we're watching it grow. We felt like that actually just wasn't some sentimental decision, but we felt called to do that. We're not avid gardeners. We did that. And so it's just for those who maybe are looking for something to do, who've lost, trying to maybe, how do I keep the memory alive? I think it's worth asking, what are some of the visual prompts? Like when I see it, I'm just going to naturally look up and I'm going to fix my eyes on the prize. And for me, and Liz as well, we planted a butterfly bush and now it's grown, and we feel like as that bush grows, so does our faith, so does our hope. There's just a natural tie-in to our belief system, and it's great to see extra life there. Like we want to see new lives find the Lord in and through this story. So that's another encouragement to parents out there is press in and ask specifically, what are some of the things, if I've lost someone dear to me, how do you want me, Lord, to remember them? And how do you want me to put people in the position of seeing you as well? So people who come in our house now, they see the butterfly bush, they see all the butterflies on it. They see the butterfly icon on the vinyl on our car. They see in a few places in our home a picture frame with Juju in it, and there's butterflies on it. They quickly realize like this is a watch and see what God will do story. So.
Love that. Such great practical advice. And I love the word picture of just following Jesus. I'm going to have to ponder that one a little bit, but I love it. So thank you so much. You've just shared so many things in our conversation over the last couple of weeks that have just really just meant a lot to me and have made me think, and I think will be just a great encouragement for our listeners as well. So thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Let's have to sign off, but I'm still here. So on behalf of both of us, just thank you for making the time to have us on tonight. It means a lot to us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, please take just a moment to leave a rating or a review, and please feel free to share it with someone you know who might be helped by it. We're so grateful for all of you who come back and listen every week, and those of you who may be listening for the very first time. I hope God has used it to encourage you today and to help you live well while you're waiting.